Very warm welcome to all who gather here today for what promises to be a mesmerizing exploration of the world of moths. This gathering holds a special significance as it aligns with our celebration of 2 decades of relentless devotion to rewilding our beloved jungle, Jim's Jungle Retreat. Before we start today's topic, which is very interesting, which is moths to a flame, I would just like to shed some light on our platform Jungle Secrets. This was about 25 years ago when this piece of land where we are located, which is about 13.5 acres uh, of agricultural land at that time, and touching the buffer zone of Corbett Tiger Reserve on two sides, was bought uh, by our founder, Mr. I.P. Singh, and his son, Dilip Akoe. The idea was to rewild it. The idea was to bring the forest that, once used to be here, but it was lost uh, to agriculture, uh, bring back the local flora, make some water holes, and make this land, come back alive with the wilderness that the area, offers. So what has happened is over last 20 odd years or so that we have been functional, we have seen remarkable increase in the biodiversity of this place. Uh, the rewilding journey was not easy. It had its own challenges, and a lot of plans were made. A lot of areas based on microhabitats were created. But as we all know, nature takes its course. Uh, there was a lot that was given to us by the forest when the birds and the the butterflies and creatures indulge in foraging, spreading the seed, uh, helping with the uh, pollination. So you start wondering certain plants that you had never planted, uh, how come they are growing here? So this is what was the gift from Mother Nature, from the surrounding forests. So as a result, we have about 250 species of birds, at least that we have recorded at the property. Uh, about 20 plus species of mammals, things like porcupine, two kinds of civets, mongoose, Indian hare, spotted deer, uh, barking deer, a lot of other creatures. And of course, the tiger and the leopard and the elephants are always around on the other side of the fence. Every evening or during the course of the night, we hear alarm calls indicating that the predator is on the move. Then also we have about 25 plus species of reptiles that we have seen at the property, and over 80 species of butterflies. So notably, our retreat has been the site of remarkable discoveries, including 4 newly recorded species of butterflies within Corbett Tiger Reserve. Uh, these were never recorded before, but last year we published a paper, and these 4 species were added to the list of Corbett Tiger Reserve. Now, as we mark this significant milestone, we are thrilled to unveil Jungle Secrets, a series of sessions led by experts drawing upon the rich tapestry of knowledge woven over 2 decades of rewilding. So we will be talking about subjects that occur at Jim's Jungle Retreat and in Corbett Tiger Reserve. And this will be a wonderful platform uh, to learn and share one's own learnings. What better way to commence this series uh, this year that we did? We had one session earlier. Then with an exploration of the often overlooked yet utterly captivating world of moths. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our distinguished guest, Sanjay Sondhi. He, of course, needs no introduction. but I would probably still say a few words. He's a member of Kalpavriksha and foundation trustee of Titli Trust. He works primarily in the Western and Eastern Himalayas, supporting grassroots conservation, ecotourism, and conservation education, focusing on birds, butterflies, moths, and herpetofauna. I am pleased to share that under Sanjay's guidance, we at Jim's Jungle Retreat are conducting a 2-year biodiversity assessment research project to understand the impact of last 2 decades of rewilding effort, uh, where we are collecting data on monthly basis on 3 indicator taxa, including birds, butterflies, and moths. So very kindly, Sanjay has agreed to help us, understand what has been created over last 20 years. So I will not take much time, of course, because the stage is set for Sanjay to share fantastic information about this subject, which is moths. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thanks for the kind intro, Manoj. This, talk that I'm going to give, I am deliberately focusing mainly on natural history observations about moths and moth behavior that I have personally encountered in more than a decade of moth study. And the reason I wanted to do that is that, too many times in today's world, everyone is focused on identification. What is this moth? What is this butterfly? Which is all necessary, of course. I mean, until you know what species it is, you can't protect it. But at the same time, in this drive for ki, hey, whatever I photographed, we often forget to look at all the funky stuff that every creature on planet Earth is involved in. And I'm going to try and share some of the really interesting things that I have seen in during my moth watching sessions. So this is a slide I actually always put up as a nice summary, but I still think it's very relevant. World of moths globally, anything between 150 to 250,000 moths, many species still to be described. India, again, we really don't know. Nobody has really compiled a comprehensive checklist, but we believe it's over 12,000 species. Most interestingly, between 30 to 50 new species being described every year. Actually, this number is a tragedy, okay? Primarily because the number of moths in India could be anything between maybe at least 20% of moth species in India may yet be undescribed. So if we are doing 30 to 50 per year, we have a very, very, very long way to go before we even know what exists. Expectedly, the Himalayan region, both Eastern and Western Himalayas, have a very, very large diversity. Again, checklists have been made, but how accurate they are and what does it really mean, we really don't know. We are constantly finding not just new moth species, but also new records of moths that have never been recorded in India before. Bottom line, much needs to be studied. I always use this as an example that the last comprehensive book on moths was written by a Brit, which had 6,000 species. No other book since then has covered as many species as this. He wrote 4 books, a person by the name of G.F. Hampson, and he wrote 4 books between 1894 and 1898, and these had about 6,000 species. So unfortunately, we still need to go back to more than 100 years ago to look at a book that is representative of what exists in India. Interestingly, because this is something that I've been looking at more and more often, is that even in the world of moths, humans have separated moths into macro and micro moths. And typically, almost everybody focuses on what we call the macro moths, which is the larger moths. Typically, I mean, this is just again a human number greater than 20. Sorry. Yeah. and micro moths, which are typically very, very small moths, less than 20 millimeters, some even less than 10 millimeters in size. And these often get completely overlooked, and even I have only started looking at micro moths in the last 2, 3, 4 years. Before that, I would just ignore them and say, hey, too small. But they aren't too small. They play an important role in the world of nature, and they need to be studied as well. uh, I've just in the process of launching this new field guide for Moths of India, which has about 1,500 species. 1,500 is nowhere close to the 12,000 that exist, but at least it's a start. It's an affordable field guide. And we've also come out with a brochure on micro moths of India, which has got about 50 odd micro moths of India, which is again something, a popular brochure for micro moths did not exist at all. So we're trying to get more and more people involved and interested in this wonderful world of moths. So, everything I'm going to talk about here, I mean, this is a story that I repeat ad nauseum. Every species on Earth does only what it needs to do to survive, other than Homo sapiens. But moths do the same. I mean, everything that a moth does is basically in order to ensure that the species survives. And whether it's the early stages, which is the caterpillar, or whether it's the pupal stage, or whether it's the adult, everything that they do is only a matter of survival. How can my species survive in the face of all the threats that I face? Is the normal response of any species that exists on this planet, and moths are no different. So, in a manner of speaking, every single thing that a moth does is driven by, hey, what threats am I facing, and how do I deal with them? So, unfortunately, the two main natural threats that moths face are predation, which is their food for a number of creatures, and a second threat is parasitism, parasites. Very unfortunately, the anthropogenic threats, insecticide, climate change, destruction of habitat, all of these, light pollution, are a much longer list. And I think not just moths, but all insects are struggling to deal with the threats that humans pose. And unfortunately, I do not have any solutions to propose in terms of how we can deal with the threats that humans pose. But there is enough data to show that insect declines across the world are really hugely significant. I mean, people are talking of numbers of between 40 to 70% of insect populations declining in tropical countries. There are lots of papers that talk about this, and most of those are driven by threats that people. Unfortunately, moths are really geared up to deal with natural threats and not so much the threats that humans pose. But even that world, in terms of how moths deal with threats that are posed to them out in the real natural world, is just completely fascinating and intriguing. And an example that I've got here on the screen is during COVID, I did a lot of rearing of caterpillars of moths and butterflies. And you will not believe that a very large number of the caterpillars that I reared, I didn't have moths or butterflies coming out of them. I had either flies or wasps. So this is like a moth called Perina nuda, from which a moth didn't emerge, but these two small wasps emerged because the caterpillar had been parasitized. So, what are the threats that moths face? So obviously the well-known threat that we all know is that they are food for a number of creatures. So whether it's birds or bats, all the moths are food for a number of creatures that are active both during the night and the day. This is intriguingly a Bhutan laughing thrush from Arunachal Pradesh, which is feeding on a golden emperor moth. And, the guy it was unfortunately the moth hung around the moth screen that we had, and the bird said, "Wow, I mean, this is a treat that I can't miss," and that was the end of the moth. This is again another human linked death, I would say, is wherever you have lights at home, you'll have predators such as these geckos, and for them to feed on, like this is a house gecko feeding on an emerald moth, and this happens all the time, that there are light sources where the moths are attracted to light, and there are predators hanging around the light sources just waiting for them to turn into a nice meal. And then even when you have moths that die that are apparently toxic. So this moth is basically it's a tiger moth, which is supposed to be very bitter tasting, foul smelling. The ants here don't seem to care. I mean, the ants seem to be having a pretty good time. This has been squashed by a human foot. So the thing that killed the moth was a human next to a moth screen, but the ants seem to relish feeding on this moth, even though it is considered to be pretty toxic and distasteful. And then you have things like, lots of insects like the praying mantis, which has just found a lichen moth on a sunflower in a garden, and it's goodbye moth and happy feeding by the praying mantis. And then this is a sight that you do see often actually in nature if you're observant. So this is a moth that has been parasitized by a fungus. And fungal threats by parasitic fungi on all stages, whether it's a caterpillar or whether it's an egg or whether it's an adult, happens more often than we would imagine. And many of you would have heard of this Kira jadi, which is this fungus plus caterpillar that grows up in the alpine meadows. And Kira jadi actually is basically a ghost moth caterpillar, which has been parasitized by a fungus. And the way this works is that typically the moth caterpillar, or the ghost moth caterpillar, is in the ground a few feet or a few meters. And when the fungus is ready to emerge from the ground, it deposits itself on the caterpillar, and it feeds on the caterpillar, and it instructs the caterpillar to actually go to the surface, and so that the fungi can emerge. And this is what is collected and sold as, what is called Kira jadi. And this cells basically is used as an aphrodisiac mainly by the Chinese. And it sells for as much as $500,000 per kg. So this too is basically a moth caterpillar, which is well known, but people don't really know it's a ghost moth, really. Many times, I see stuff in the wild and I find out later on that, oh my God, what's happened? So this is a photograph that I took somewhere in Assam, and I didn't realize what I was photographing. When I photographed the caterpillar, I said, oh, there's a fly sitting on it. And it's only when I downloaded the image and I started looking at it more closely, and I said, hey man, what are these small white things on the moth? And then I looked a little more closely, and I realized that these are eggs being laid by this stachanid fly. And the caterpillar, this moth is a day-flying moth. It's a Dysphenia. It's called the false tiger moth. And the eggs will hatch, and the caterpillar will be parasitized. The moth will be parasitized by the caterpillars or the larva of this fly. So you won't believe, during COVID, I reared about 50 or 60 caterpillars, and 30% of them were parasitized by either wasps or flies. So when I actually talk to people and I say, what's the biggest threat to butterflies and moths? It's not predators. The biggest threat to caterpillars of butterflies and moths and the adults is parasites, either by dipterans, hymenopterans, or by fungus. So So adult moths, whole bunch of stuff that they do to protect themselves, anti-predatory strategy, and very interestingly, uh, one of the main things that moths uh, use both at the adult stage and at the larval stage is something called tongue twister, aposematism. So this word basically is a creature which is advertising that don't eat me. The Greek word, the etymology of this word basically is apo means away from, and semat means as a sign of danger. So stay away from me because I'm a sign of danger. And in the moth world, visual, odor, chemical, acoustic are all used rampantly uh, by moths as well as the adult moths specifically to protect themselves. So I'm going to walk you through some very funky things that moths do to save themselves. So one of the most well-studied, means of protection, which is visual aposematism, is mimicry. So very interestingly, on the screen, you're seeing a butterfly and a moth next to each other. The moth is this Amicia sanguifera is a burnet moth. It mimics the striped blue crow. And you won't believe this. When I saw this moth, I first saw it flying. When I saw it flying, I said, oh, there's a striped blue crow flying. So I followed it and I sat down and I said, where did the butterfly disappear? And when I looked closely, I said, hey man, this is not a butterfly. This looks to be a moth. So it's a day flying moth. It mimics this butterfly. The butterfly itself is distasteful. And the moth is also distasteful and toxic. And it mimics another. So it basically has like it's a double whammy. The moth itself is distasteful and it mimics a butterfly that is distasteful. And this is called Mullerian mimicry, which is there is a mimic that is copying somebody which is itself got protection through toxicity, which it advertises through bright colors, and it also copies something else that has the similar nature. And the same with the one below, which is another burnet moth, another day flying moth, and that mimics the glassy tiger. So many day flying moths are really good mimics of butterflies that are bitter tasting. Interestingly, they don't just copy the color and the patterns. Even the flight of the moth is identical to the butterfly. So when you see it flying and you see it in the real world, it's not just patterns and colors. Even its behavior is copying the model, so to say. So this is another example, which is a very cool example of Mullerian mimicry. So this moth on the left is called the Apatani glory. It was described only about 4 or 5 years ago. And it mimics this wonderful, probably one of the prettiest butterflies in the country, which is called the Bhutan glory. And both are day flying, both occur in the same habitat. Both are seen at Tale Wildlife Sanctuary in Eagle Nest. And it's incredible that when the Apatani glory flies, it looks like a Bhutan glory. It's much smaller than a Bhutan glory, but it does look like a small Bhutan glory in flight. And of course, its patterns are also very similar. And then you have Batesian mimicry. Batesian mimicry means what? It means that there is a creature that is mimicking mimicking something else. The creature itself is not bitter tasting or foul smelling or whatever, but it is mimicking something else that is acts as a deterrent to predators. You won't believe this. This is a photograph I took in Arunachal Pradesh. And like 3 years or 4 years after I photographed it, I thought it's a bumblebee or maybe the hornet. And I just I took a photograph and I let it be. And then at some point in time, I was looking at my images and I said, but this guy has got scales and it's got antenna. I said, this is not a wasp. This is something else. And then I dug a little deeper and I found out that it's actually it's a moth, which is called a cecid or a clearwing moth. and it's day flying, and it mimics the hornet, which is Vespa tropica. So it's such a terrific mimic that you really can't even make out. This group of moths, which is called cessids or cessidae, mimic wasps so well that there are many times that when I see a wasp, I'm looking at it very closely, saying, hey man, is it a cessid or is it a wasp? And sometimes you can't tell until you get a photograph. You cannot even make out whether it's a moth or a wasp. This is an example of Batesian mimicry, because the moth itself is not bitter tasting, foul smelling, but it copies something else that acts as a deterrent to predation. Then you have a different kind of aposematism, which is odor and chemical. So there's a whole bunch of butterflies and a whole bunch of moths that are bitter tasting and have very bright colors. They are basically telling their message to predators: you can't eat me. Like, I'm horrible to eat. Cha. And if you do come close to me, then I'm going to bubble these. You see these foaming bubbles. So many of these moths have this froth coming out of them when they get threatened. They actually take out this bubble of foam, which is horrible to smell, and even if you taste it, it's really bad. And very interestingly, if you observe these in the field, after a while, the moth will suck this bubble back in, because it doesn't want to waste the toxins that it is using to scare you. So these foam bubbles come out, and then after it feels the threat has gone away, it sucks them back in for use in the future. So this is basically using odor and chemicals to deter predators. Then you have acoustic, and this, of course, is one of the from an evolutionary standpoint, very famous story of moths and bats. So the main nocturnal predator for moths is bats. And there is this funky group of moths called the tiger moths, which, everyone knows that bats use echolocation, or they emit sounds to locate their prey at night. And these moths know that bats, will come and eat them. So the tiger moths, which are bitter tasting, they emit clicks to tell the bats that, hey man, I'm a tiger moth. You can't eat me. Like, I'm bitter tasting. Go find somebody else. And they have a specific organ on their body near the thorax, which they use to give out these sounds. And this, in a manner of speaking, is acoustic aposematism, to fool the bat or tell the bat that don't eat me, don't come close to me. Of course, the moths and bat war, as I like to call it, is a fascinating story itself. So many large moths like these this is one of the emperor moths. They have these large tails, and the tails are twisted. Now, the twist in the tail is that the reason the tail is twisted is that when the bats emit the sounds to locate the moth, the tails deflect the sounds in a different direction, thereby fooling the bat. And I still remember that I read a paper maybe 5 or 6 years ago where and I was shaking my head at the horror of the experiment, where people caught a whole bunch of Saturnid moths with tails, and they took them into one room, and in a whole bunch of moths, they cut the tails off, and then a whole bunch of moths, they kept the tails. And they then put bats into the room, and the experiment showed that the moths that had the tails had a much higher survival rate compared to the Saturnid moths that didn't have a tail. So effectively, the tail acts is part of the battle between the bats and the moths. And then the story goes on. So many moths have ears, quote unquote, to detect the sounds that the bats emit. Many moths have their own ways of sending sounds back to the bat. And many moths actually do different things. They emit the sounds in a fashion that bats get confused. Many bats have a counter strategy. When a bat gets closer and closer to a moth, typically the echolocation intensity increases, so the sound increases. But there are some bats that have evolved that as they get closer and closer to the moth, the level of clicks dip. So the moth actually believes that the bat is going further away when it is actually getting closer and closer to the moths. So this is like a evolutionary arms race where the moth does one thing, the bat does something else, and the moth does something else. And I think this is an ongoing battle of evolution where one is trying to outdo the other, and both are surviving, so that's good news. In this evolutionary arms race, there are also some moths like hawk moths. In fact, this is a moth that is found in India. It's called Hypotion boerhaave. They emit sounds which jam the radar that bats have. And then there are other moths like this one over here. This is a tiger moth. Very interestingly, these guys have an organ which is called the corymeta. Corymeta in Greek actually means Greek feathers. Corymeta actually is a sex organ which is used to spread pheromones. But when the moth comes out with this funky creature, I mean, the bat gets surprised and says, hey, what the hell am I looking at? And it also becomes much larger for the bat. And the bat says, this is too large for me to eat. So the corymeta actually acts not only as a, as a sex organ, but also as an anti-predation organ for the moth for bats. This war continues. There are many moths, such as, this emperor moth, as well as monkey moths, that have got very, very furry abdomens. And the function of these furry abdomens is that if the bat is emitting, echolocation sounds, they don't allow it to be reflected. It's like an absorbing mechanism. So they absorb the clicks, so the clicks don't go back to the bat at all. So it's a very cool, battle between these two creatures. Then moths have a lot of other visual cool things that they do. So this is the Atlas moth. And on many occasions, I feel that, this actually looks like a part of the wing, which actually looks like a snake. And the markings of the moth are such that it deters predators, because some predators will believe that, oh my God, this is not a moth. This is a massive moth, okay? It's like almost 10 inches in wingspan, maybe 12 inches in wingspan. So it has these snake-like markings which act as a deterrent to many predators. Then you have other moths that are using visual markings to survive. So many butterflies and many moths have got these eyes. So this is one of the owl moths, and the function of these eye spots is basically to intimidate predators. So if a predator comes close to this moth and it believes that, oh my God, this is a creature with some large eyes, I can't eat it. It's just too big for me to eat, and it intimidates the predator into flying away. And similar, this is another moth that has these large eye spots. And there have been lots of studies about how eye spots help in deterring predators and act as anti-predation, both for butterflies and moths. I mean, there's lots of studies that show that the eye spots work. Then you have, startle mechanisms. This is a very pretty moth, quite common. It's found throughout India, Thais honesta. When the moth sits like this, and all of a sudden it will spread its wings and show this bright color, which ends up startling predators. So this is actually called a startle strategy, which when the moth is sitting like this and the predator comes close to it, it quickly spreads its wings, and the bright colors act as a means to startle the predator. This is another common moth. I actually reared this in my garden at home. It does the same thing. So its underwings are brightly colored, and it's used to startle predators and frighten them away. And there's been again lots of studies which shows that how body orientation, how they sit, and how they move their wings help them in anti-predation. Postural camouflage is also another cool thing. Many people ask me, hey, look at this moth, see why it's sitting like this. And I tell them it's sitting like that because now it doesn't look like a moth. So these, the ones on top, this is called a eutelid, and the ones here are called slug moths or limocorids. And these guys they adopt these funky postures, which basically tells predators that I'm not a moth, I'm something else. There's no point in trying to eat me. And again, there's lots of studies that have been done. This is a pyrillid or a snout moth, which does the same thing. This is in my home. And they sit in this funky manner, which makes you feel it's not a moth, it's something else. Many other things, many other strategies get used by moths. And this is one in which I actually haven't found any studies. I've tried to actually find out what's happening here and why this happens. There are many, many occasions in which I have encountered mass emergences of moths. So this is basically a moth called Cyclidia rectificata, an eagle nest. And on this one night, 2018 August, I had, I don't know, I think there were 400 of them or 500 of them on the screen on night one. On the next night, it was single digit. So what happened was that there's a mass emergence of these moths. And while this hasn't been studied too well, my belief is that the theory of mass emergence is simple, is that if there are so many of us, how many of us can be eaten? I mean, no predator is actually going to be able to wipe out the population. So if all of us emerge together, because the climatic conditions, everything is appropriate, the chance of our species surviving increases dramatically. And it's not just these. I have witnessed this repeatedly. This is a tiger moth, a lichen moth, Syringa rufifrons. There were maybe 60, 70, 100 of them on the screen on one night, and one night only. And the next night that didn't happen. And similarly, another lichen moth. So I have actually observed this for almost every moth family, where there have these mass emergences. And basically what these mass emergences do is they increase the chance of survival for the moth, because there's no way that all of them can be eaten. For moths to become moths, they need to survive when they are caterpillars. So caterpillars themselves have got a whole bunch of strategies, which include camouflage, making themselves unpalatable, making themselves itchy, and a whole bunch of things. So these guys, this is basically a fruit-piercing moth. So they also adopt anti-predatory postures. And when they are threatened, they curl themselves up into this posture, which makes them look like anything but a caterpillar. And these eyes, of course, make the predator feel, oh my God, what am I getting into? Isse takkar nahi lena hai mere ko. And it helps them get away. This is the adult moth, and this is the one on the top is the caterpillar of this moth. Then you have the slug moths. I mean, many moths do this, but the slug moths are really famous for it. This green coat moth at the bottom. I still remember 1990s in Pune. We had a jamun tree in our house, in our backyard, and something plopped on my head. I put my head up, touched something, and what came away was a caterpillar, this one. And then I howled and yelled because it itched, and the thing hurt like hell. And and it hurts like hell. I mean, I had a friend of mine in Pune who used to say that whenever you see these things, you need to check their IQ. IQ means what? Itch quotient. And the itch quotient of these moths from this family is like on 10 out of 10. So if you ever see a caterpillar like this, you can check out the itch quotient, but don't blame me later on. So these are not just itchy, they're also bitter tasting. And both the itchiness and the toxicity because of which they're bitter tasting makes them very difficult to eat. Then you have, again, postural camouflage. So this is actually taken in my garden. This is the moth, problepsis. And that thing that you're seeing, that's actually the caterpillar. So it's a twig mimic. And in the photograph that I've shown of the plant, there is a caterpillar sitting there, but you can't see it because the posture of the caterpillar is such that it just looks like a twig. And even when I first saw this and I said, "Yaar, this doesn't look like a caterpillar. Ye to danda hai iska." And I looked closely and then it moved and I said, "Oh my God, man, this is a caterpillar." So they use postural camouflage to save themselves as, again, many studies how postural camouflage helps moth caterpillars. This is another example where, this is basically called, it's a moth which is called the black looper. And this also resembles a twig so much. This is the adult moth. And then there are other caterpillars like the puss moth caterpillar, which doesn't look like a caterpillar at all. I mean, it looks like some weird alien from outer space. Again, the yellow underwing. This is how the caterpillar sits most of the time. You can hardly make out that it's a caterpillar because it just sits on the twig completely. And when it gets startled and threatened, then it adopts a different posture. And I always tell everybody, this caterpillar feeds on leaves of the Rangoon creeper. And we have a Rangoon creeper in front of our house. And I can never see the caterpillars. Sometimes I see their droppings. Actually, it happens in the month of August. But the reason I get alerted that the caterpillar is on the Rangoon creeper is the jungle babblers seem to know when the caterpillars are on the Rangoon creeper and they come and feed. And when they come and feed, I start looking for the cats and I know that they're around. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to spot them. And then there are caterpillars like this that everyone would have seen. These are called woolly bears. Some of them are itchy, not all of them. And this large amount of hair makes them look bigger than they really are. And if the hair is itchy, that acts as a protection mechanism for them. And then there are funky moths like this. This is a footman moth. And what this funky moth does is that it actually creates this igloo-like structure. The caterpillar makes this, believe it or not. And the hair of the caterpillars is used to make this igloo. And the hair that the caterpillar uses is coated with a toxic chemical. So the igloo actually acts as a deterrent to many predators because the igloo itself repels predators. And inside is where the cocoon hangs, protecting the cocoon stage using this igloo-like structure. And I remember I had seen this, many of you may have seen this in the wilds. There's a series of caterpillars that is walking across the road. And I remember seeing this and I was saying, what the hell is going on? Why are they doing what they're doing? Road rage, right? You can't cross the road till the caterpillars have crossed it. And then I started reading about it, trying to figure out what they're doing. And I found out that this is what is called a cluster anti-predatory strategy. And these are basically moths under the Drepanid family. And they have hairs in the larva, which have toxins. And as they walk, they leave a trail of utic acid, which basically deters anybody from following them and deters predators from eating them because they've got these toxins in them. So that's their strategy, where they use cluster mechanism to tell predators that don't eat me. So there's lots of studies. These are called processionary moths because of the way the caterpillars walk in a procession. And then there are many other moths that protect themselves not by doing anything else, but by simple mechanisms like folding. So these are grass moths. Actually, if you have these jasmine, right? if you have this plant in your garden, and you see these leaf pinwheel jasmine, and if you see these leaf folds, inside the leaf fold is a caterpillar of this grass moth. So how they protect themselves is they just fold the leaf. And if you do happen to open the leaf and you go back after half an hour, the caterpillar will have sewn back the leaf with its silk threads to protect itself. So this is just a whole bunch of interesting stories, interesting things that I've seen in the wild. For those of you who are interested in moth behavior and ecology, there's this book that came out 3 or 4 years ago. A wonderful book. It's available in India as well on Amazon. Lots and lots of interesting stories about moths, moth and moth behavior. Would strongly recommend it. And thanks to everyone. I must say that I have given parts of this presentation before. So I hope that for many of you it was new, but I've also added a few things to it as well. So I hope it was interesting, and I hope people liked it. And
It's been wonderful to listen to you, Sanjay.
yeah, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Yes, any
Happy to take them.
questions? From Rahul, is there any moth caterpillar feeding on mosses?
There's a okay, sorry, I'm just putting this if people can see this. This is the book by David Lees and Albert Zilli. They're both in the Natural History Museum in London, but this is available in India as well, so you can get it. It's Moths: A Complete Guide to Biology and Behavior. So there are many moths that feed on lichen. Okay, so there is in fact a whole group of moths which is called lichen moths, because that's their main food. Moss, I'm sure there will be moths that that they will be feeding on moss as well. I mean, I'm not aware of it, but lichen for sure.
Great.
And there's loads of questions. I can't answer all of them.
I know. Very quickly, Saif Ali Khan is asking, sir, I had a question. Like in butterflies, do moths also migrate?
Yes. See, look, I mean, we need to understand that moths and butterflies, the distinction is human. I don't think moths and butterflies are so concerned whether they're a moth or a butterfly. I mean, they moths definitely migrate, especially, for example, things like hawk moths and stuff like that. They've been known to migrate as much as 100 kilometers and stuff like that. So they do migrate for sure.
There's one question which I think even a novice like me can answer. Shamil is asking what is the Hindi name for moth, and I'm sure it is patanga.
Patanga.
Am I
Well, it
right?
depends on the language. So Hindi mein patanga hai, but
Uh,
there are different names for different languages. So
Different
yeah, but
languages.
patanga, yeah, yeah.
Uh, then Ashok Sen Gupta is asking, aquatic moth caterpillars, tell something about them.
Aquatic moth caterpillars. I'm not really aware of aquatic moth caterpillars. Yeah, not. I haven't read much about them. Don't know.
Yeah. So, anything else? Woolly woolly bear moth caterpillars feed on moss or lichen. What I saw last week in Mumbai.
Yeah. So basically, the caterpillar that I showed, the big, I mean, that's basically the most common one that you see is this thing called macrobrochus, and they feed on lichen.
Mhm.
I don't know about moss. Lichen, I'm sure. I don't know whether they feed on moss as well. But yes, I mean, but they're called lichen moths because they feed on lichen. I mean, all the footman moths are lichen moths because they feed on, yeah.
So we'll take last two questions. One is by Anshul. I have an evolutionary biology question. Why do you think they being mainly night creatures develop attraction to light? Do their life cycle depend on moonlight, for example, time of emergence?
So, this question of why moths are attracted to light is an old one, and there are no real correct answers, and there are lots of theories, and none of them are proven.
Yeah. Haripal sir was asking something.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Many years ago, I read in America they were doing these studies, and they said that the moths pheromone when they mate, their pheromones can travel hundreds of miles.
Well, I don't know about hundreds of miles, but there have been studies done where they have studied that the Saturnaid moths, or the very large moths, the males, they have very, very large antenna. So there have been studies done where mates have been attracted from as much as 3 to 4 miles away. Hundreds of kilometers, I would doubt that. But
Sounded strange, but they
yeah,
have done some study.
a few miles
Yeah,
have
100.
definitely been studied, yes, and
You
scientifically.
see, they were talking about this moth in the Florida area,
Yeah.
and it was attracting a couple of states away on the southern side. So I
I
don't know.
I
I
wouldn't I
don't
would
know.
I would I would find that hard to believe that
Well, it
because
doesn't sound quite right, but somehow,
yeah. Yeah.
uh,
Right.
anyway.
Uh, Thank you for asking this question, sir. Uh, but I'm taking one last question. Raju Pasalkar is asking, what is average life of a moth?
So average life of a moth is like between there are many moths that are non-feeding moths, such as saturnid, such as monkey moths. Those live probably just a week because they don't feed as adults.
Okay.
And there are other moths that feed as adults, and then they would have lives that could be anything between a week, a month to 3 months, depending on whether they get eaten or not. But important thing for everyone to note is that once moths emerge, they mate, and then their only useful purpose on planet Earth is food for another creature. So once a moth or a butterfly has mated, and then they only exist either for pollination or as food for somebody else.
So uh, thank you so much for taking us through this wonderful journey of moths, trying to understand these nocturnal creatures, which are, there are a lot of myths about them. People don't really understand them, but I think they are fascinating, especially, after seeing these lovely images and hearing these wonderful stories from you, Sanjay. We are privileged today to have you with us. Thank you so much. And thank you, all the participants, for being here. As I said earlier, this platform, Jungle Secrets, is an ongoing platform. We are going to have a lot of such interesting sessions coming up. Uh, we recently had one on spiders by this young, wonderful expert on spiders called Devi Priyadarshini. She's having another session on 25th of August with us at 4 o'clock. And her final session will be on the 31st of August uh, for this month. Uh, in between, we are also going to have an interesting session on 29th of August, which is focused on macro life. This is also about photography of macro life. Uh, Please watch our social media space for what all is coming to this uh, platform, Jungle Secrets. Follow us. Thank you very much for everyone for joining us today. Thank you.